Hi, welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So today I am doing some abstract landscapes with simple layers, simple techniques and not many supplies. So I am using black acrylic ink and yellow fluid acrylic paint and a dark green soft pastel, heavy gel medium. You could use a matte medium, a liquid matte medium, but the heavy gel medium gives us a bit of structure. Gesso, which is what I'm painting on here just now, because this is 300 GSM watercolour paper, and I just want to make it less absorbent and have a bit more tooth. So just one thin layer of gesso. Also some paintbrushes and a palette knife. The gesso also helps that washi tape to be a bit more secure to the paper and prevent less gapping. So this is black acrylic ink and a rigger paintbrush. It's just a pointy paintbrush that you use in watercolours. And I'm applying this to the gesso while it's still wet. So I've kind of done sharp lines, and now all I'm doing is blurring the lines out in one direction. So I'm kind of creating a sort of series of 4 A6 postcard size pictures by sort of repeating processes and keeping the colour palette the same. So for all the lines are different, I'm kind of treating them the same by blurring at one side. So next I'm adding the heavy gel medium, which is just like a thick matte medium, as my understanding has it. And I'm basically applying it quite haphazardly, but kind of creating a sort of shape at the same time. I'm using the palette knife and I'm kind of scoring into it. I'm not applying it evenly because this will provide a lot of texture for the paint to sit upon. The paint also behaves differently on top of it, and the soft pastel and the gesso. So it just gives us a bit more variety. Once I've put it out there while it's still wet, I'm using this kind of wire stiff grid, and I'm just putting some sort of square shapes onto it. Now, you can't see the heavy gel medium very well on the page, so it helps you do it a bit more randomly. Now, this takes about 2 hours to dry because I have applied it very thickly, but it's absolutely worth the wait. I then stamp the grid back on, just lightly onto areas, just to give a subtle hint of those squares. So of course I had to footer a little bit before I let it dry. So that is the fluid yellow acrylic paint. I've added some water to it, and I'm using this dropper to try and soak it up from the gel plate that I'm using as a palette. Not overly successful. I then try and sort of just use the paintbrush and shake the paintbrush on, like so. It's quite nice, that effect. I don't normally spatter. And then, of course, the black that I'd used earlier started making its way into the yellow paint. So I'm very lightly using that paintbrush, knowing that I shouldn't be, because I've put those structures into the gel medium and I really want to keep those structures. But anyway, I'm plodding on. Resistance and patience are actually 2 really good attributes for somebody that wants to be an artist. So I have an old rag here, which is actually a pile of old children's socks that were odd. So I'm using them to mop up the paint. Anyway, I'm dabbing lightly with them, just trying to even out that yellow paint a bit. Sort of make it more blurred looking, but without pressing into the heavy gel medium that I can see. I'm actually glad I did this because it sat nice on the heavy gel medium. And then what I'm doing is attempting to add a bit more. And then I've dabbed at it again and I've realised you need to stop now or you're going to ruin it. And I do, and I'm quite proud of myself for that. So here we are 2 hours later and it is dry now, even the thick parts of the gel medium. So I've turned it upside down to try and get a different perspective, and I'm just using the fluid yellow paint straight from the tube or the bottle even. And I'm trying to sort of, so we need to create shape a little bit now. So I'm applying the yellow, but you can see in the first one, the top left, I kind of went for a horseshoe. I've added a square of it on the bottom left. I'm going quite triangular with, except for that changed. It's more kind of square with a bit hanging off it on the top right, and the bottom right, I just do the whole underneath of that black line. But you can see the heavy gel medium starting to kind of come, you can see it showing through. Now this is gesso. I like to use the gesso because I like it when I rub at it when it's dry, and I can, it's easier to distress than sort of white acrylic paint is. So I've been using that a lot recently and I'm liking it. So I'm using it to both tone down the yellow, spread the yellow out more, and also to kind of blur the edges of the yellow. So it's kind of helping me add value. It's helping me sort of bring shapes together and just to sort of give that shaded effect a little bit. So this is the dark green. No, it's not. This is the black. Apologies. I use a black soft pastel as well. And I'm just putting another outline of a shape on each picture. So this is just water that I'm using to blur the line slightly of the black soft pastel. I'm not blurring it so much that it disappears completely, but I'm trying to add some blurred edging to it. I did swap out the paintbrush so that I could, the other one was quite small and stiff, whereas this is a lot thicker and bigger. So it's just helping me sort of graduate it into the wet yellow paint. This is a full process video, and all the steps that I've done, I'm showing here, and it's only the drying time really that I've edited out. So next thing that I do is I get out quite a wide flat paintbrush, and I've put some gesso on the paintbrush, and I'm just going to do a shape on each picture with it. The gesso dries a bit more transparent than it looks when it's wet. So this will be a fairly faint mark. So I've just did a vertical and a horizontal line in the top two. This one I do a curve. And the bottom left, I do a kind of horseshoe, but it's a bit square edged. But we work with it anyway. And all these paints dry quite fast, so they're kind of drying, so I'm not actually having to stop for drying time as such. So this is the dark green soft pastel this time. And what I'm doing is I'm mimicking the shape that I'd put on. So here I'm going to do like a horseshoe shape, but I'm making them smaller. They're obviously skinnier in line, we've got the matte gel medium, the heavy gel medium, which kind of impedes the movement of like the soft pastel and the paintbrush as well. I'm just making each decision with each layer that I make. I'm not actually purposefully following a formula or anything. It's just what felt like the right decision at the time. I'm also in quite an experimental phase with the abstract art just now. I find myself doing different things quite a lot, and I'm very much enjoying that. So the soft pastels do react with water, so I'm just putting a bit of the gel medium over the top of those dark green soft pastel marks that I made, just because I want to retain the sharpness, because it'll be a nice contrast to the kind of blurred black soft pastel I used earlier. You could use matte medium for this, or a clear gesso, or even gesso itself. The good thing about adding this gel medium on top of the soft pastels is I need to force myself to let it dry now, which I do. It's drying about half an hour because these are fairly thin coatings of the gel medium. So I'm mixing some black acrylic ink and the yellow fluid paint together to get quite a mid-value sort of, well, black and yellow make a sort of green, depending on the black you use, I suppose. Mars black, that's Mars black. So you get a kind of, so this is quite a golden browny green colour. And what I've done is sort of just chose to make another shape. I do like shapes. That tends to be where I'm drawn to when I start a new layer. I think, you know, I don't like to just slapdash put it on. I don't know whether it's inexperience, maybe it comes after doing it for years and years, but I do like to have some sort of purpose to where the paint's going to go. So this is my way, I suppose, of trying to keep it abstract, but at the same time feeling confident about applying the paint. Anyway, so while it's still wet, what I'm doing is I'm pressing into it with a book page so that I can bring some of it back off. This is just sort of, will make it more uneven. It'll help get rid of some of the brush marks. And also with the gesso and the gel medium that we've already used, it should help bring some of that out as well, so that when I talked about the behaviours on top of them, so on top of the gel medium it'll be slightly different colour and all the sort of textures will show through. And with the gesso as well, I find that when you put the paint on and lift it back off, it can give it quite a distressed look to it. So I've been a bit less, rigid about what shapes I've chosen for the bottom too. They're a bit more organic, apart from that one that I've just made. And then I will blot those as well with the paper. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add sort of water around the edging of them to help blur them as well. I do find that starting off the painting, each layer, it's fairly easy to begin with, working out, right, I'll do this, I'll do that. But as you progress to sort of the middle, sort of second half of it, it does become more difficult to decide what to do next. But actually, I didn't overly struggle with these, and I don't know whether or not it's because I'd used the heavy gel medium and the gesso, because it just gave me that extra something to work with. Instead of being quite a flat plane, I had a lot of shapes and textures, and where just the way that the paint sat on top of them gave me a variety that I maybe try and build up with too many layers usually. So after adding the water, it was quite wet in areas, so what I'm doing is I'm just kind of tipping it about, giving it a shake, you know, I'm trying to control the kind of drip movements that have occurred. And you can see a drip coming down the bottom left. And I'm just gently banging it on the table, but gently. Tapping, that's the word. To try and get that drip to come to the bottom. I've removed another one. So the water, basically the excess water, I'm trying to manipulate it. Do you see that drip coming back down on the top right? I really like that. So we're dry now. It's been about 45 minutes because my mum and dad were in for a cup of tea. Anyway, this is the dark green soft pastel again, and I'm using it on its side, and I'm just kind of rubbing some of the colour on, and places where I feel it's appropriate. So the kind of line shapes that are there already, the outline of the shapes that are there already, I'm trying to work about them to see where do I need a darker value, where do I need a bit more sort of shape, basically to try and create balance, but also support what's already there, enhance it, and really try and... We're at that stage now where we need to be thinking about the finished picture. So I do take a bit of thinking time with this, as you can see. So on the bottom right, you can see I've kind of... So that looks like a wave, the white kind of swoosh. You could imagine that's like moving water or something. So I've sort of supported that by going round the outside of it with the dark green. And on the bottom left, I've just basically did a couple of sections around that curve. And I've made one side the dark side and just put a small amount on the other side to balance that. So next I'm adding gesso on top of the soft pastel. I really like gesso and soft pastel together. It gives a very matte, very chalky finish. And I like that it adds just another variation of a finish, you know, compared to the acrylic paint. The other thing I like about it is when it's dry, you can kind of rub into it a bit, you know, wet it slightly, damp maybe, and you know, you can actually rub into it a bit and remove bits of it, and it does, you can make it look quite distressed. So I feel at this stage, when we've added such a dark colour, we really are heading towards the end, and we're really defining, you know, the overall look of this picture. We're choosing our dark values. We're choosing the kind of shapes that are going to be there at the end. This helps to add form where the shapes kind of start to look like they may, well, in this case, you know, they could look like rocks or a river, mountains, etc. So when we have finished applying the gesso, I'm going to rub into it a bit more around the edges than anything else with a rag. So this is part of the reason that I do love the gesso and the soft pastels so much. You can see there how uneven the colour is of that dark green now. And, you know, the way that it's, everything that's underneath it, the gesso that's underneath it, the gesso that's on top, the heavy gel medium that's underneath it, the other paints, you can see that it's very textured looking. It gives the illusion of, like, you know, wild grasses or something. It's very inconsistent in its coverage. Oh, that was a lot to get to the word coverage. And especially over, see, the thicker gel medium that we made we put the grid shapes into. It really behaves very well over that. and it's very blendable. So see the edges, the way that they're sitting, the way the different shades of the green are sitting over the yellow. They all kind of blend in together, but they're still kind of separate. I just think it's magical, soft pastels and gesso. They're my new favourite thing. So that's most of these finished now. So I'm removing the tape so we can just see what they look like individually. I will add in, we need to kind of choose a focal point and just a little bit of tidying up. I feel like we've got really good darks and lights, and I'm over the moon with, you know, how each picture looks. I think there is definitely a kind of wild landscape look to them, mostly. But I do want to add in just a couple more highlights to just create a focal point and make sure they feel finished. So I'll be looking at them each individually and kind of looking at where I can just emphasise a bit of contrast, add a bit more of a kind of light source, and, you know, just to help them feel finished. But yeah, I'm over the moon with them. They look really good. I think the colours work very well together. So I found what kind of feels like the lightest place in the picture. However, this is in the middle, which is maybe not ideal. So I've brought it out slightly more to the bottom left, and I've chosen that dark line to place this white gesso against, just to emphasise that part of the picture. So I'm almost brightening it up, but I'm also kind of ensuring the contrast is in the right place. I don't know whether this is technically correct or not, but I really liked how it looked, so I was happy with it. I like using the gesso because I can kind of rub it back off if I feel it's too much, but also it is quite transparent for, you know, a white. So you don't just want to do it on one point though, because it needs to feel cohesive with the rest of the picture. So that was that one. I mean, I do footer over these for a while. And as they dry, you know, I'll maybe think, oh, that just needs emphasised a wee bit more. And then I rub at them as well. But really just trying to find, you know, create a light area because we've got a lot of darks, or enhance a light area, and then have a really good sort of black and white, or, you know, your darkest dark and your lightest light together in an area that you feel is appropriate for a focal point. Do you see the difference though that it does make? So that is actually the focal point area and the brightest area in the same part. So that was quite easy, but it really just brings it alive. I do put another point on here, but I'm sitting looking at it for ages, haven't I? I'm not going to leave all this bit in because there's a lot of back toing and froing, and really you would just look at each picture individually and make a choice yourself. And that was the last thing I did to them all, just highlighting little areas with a little bit of gesso. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.